Next item, please.
Also in discussion item B, first review of the budget 2020-2021.
Well, good evening,
Mr.
President Thorpe,
Wall. Yeah.
members of the board, and Dr. Maleko. I'm glad you extended the meeting. I thought I was going to only have about a minute to do this whole thing. So I'm going to share my screen.
Did you get an award for that?
Maybe. The fastest ever. All right, so hopefully you should be able to see the screen now.
Yes, we
And can everybody see it okay?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, so we're going to go through this quickly. We do have a finance committee meeting tomorrow that we're going to go into much more depth on the finances. And normally we would hand it before the meeting, but as we've been aware, our board meetings take a lot longer these days, which is okay. So we decided to schedule it tomorrow. So I believe it is also on YouTube. So those that aren't actually on the committee can watch it also. We usually start off with a calendar. So this calendar is how we kind of go through the budget adoption process. Typically, the governor's proposal is usually released by now, but I'm sure all the complexity of these days in funding that it has actually been pushed off a little bit. Well, that really starts off our budget cycle of knowing what is for 2021 at the end, in case there's a proration or extra money, or for 21-22 for next year. Going back a little bit, if you remember, last year was an unusual year because of the pandemic. There was a lot of strange things going on, and we'll kind of get that in just a second. But as you can see, it's going to take us all the way through June 30th to adopt a budget. Now, we are required by law to have a budget adopted by June 30th for 21-22. Even though we might not know what our finances are, we're still required to go through that process. So these are kind of a rough schedule that we'll follow as we go along. And this is just a visual presentation. We are a large district, and the state requires us to break it down into funds, as we call them, or buckets as a common term. And we're restricted by each bucket of what we can spend it on. So as you look at the budget, you'll see it's kind of broken down into these categories, and we have to do that by state law. So we can actually adopt a budget based on all the requirements that the state can then compare us to all the districts across the board, make sure as they bring the information to the state level that it's all similar in how it was put together. The only thing really new here is down here at the very bottom, where we have the special revenue funds under funded projects. We have with CARE grants. We have 7 CARE grants this year, and that's something new this year that we'll get into more discussion. So one of the things, kind of back to a history lesson for just kind of bring everybody up to date, as we're required to have the budget adopted by June 30th, last year, we knew the economy was taking a slide. So there was a lot of concerns that the state aid money available wasn't going to be able to even fund what our current program is, let alone next year. They were actually looking at a $650 per pupil reduction in our state aid for the 1920 school year and the 2021 school year. Not a double, but they didn't know if it was going to impact 1920 or 2021. But the net effect was a $650 decrease. So that was roughly about $13.5 million. So if you look at our original budget on the left-hand side, it was only $208 million for the general fund, but what we're amending it to is the $221. Now, come August, the state had a second or third revenue consensus meeting. They wanted to wait for the income taxes to come in. If you remember last year, the income tax deadline was extended to July 15th. So they wanted to kind of get that money into the know what it was going to be before they would make a decision. And what they found out was both the income tax and the sales tax came in much higher than their expectations, especially the sales tax, because all the money that people got through the COVID payments and all the additional unemployment money and all that, people didn't bank it. They actually spent it not necessarily on services, because services aren't taxed, but actually on buying things. So therefore, the revenues that came in on the sales tax was much higher. The $650 was not what did not occur, and the budget for 2021 actually included additional $75. Quite a bit of swing from where we thought we were originally in May and early June to what would actually happen, and the final budget was signed in September, well after our school year started. So our original budget is not surprisingly different than what we actually amended. So just kind of a quick follow-up on that. And again, as we go through this, the main things we always look at is our state aid, that's our student population, and our salary and benefits. Those are the big three things in school districts that really consume or revenue coming in or that we use in any budget. So we always kind of, focus on those areas because they're the big items that we have to account for. So here is our student count. And as you can see, from 1920 to 2021, in that yellow section, the previous year we lost 124 students. And this year we lost 183 students. Now we actually projected a slight increase from last year. So our budget was based on a little higher student increase than what actually came in. And this was not uncommon that we found out many students in the public setting might have found other alternatives, either homeschooling or going to non-public schools. So it wasn't surprising that we saw a reduction as when we started school, there was a lot of, will we be in session or not in session? So that's not uncommon. Now, normally we would have had a 183 student decrease. However, they have what they call a super formula for the calculation for this year, where they prorated more of our student counts on the previous year and less on our current year. Normally it would be the spring of last year and the fall of the current year. So they based it more on 1920's count than 2021's count. So therefore, in this column here, the 4578 is what, backtrack, sorry. The 4578 is what we actually had to account in our financial aspect for funding versus the 183. So we actually received less of a loss for that student count because they knew this was happening across the state. So they wanted to kind of buffer that for this upcoming year. In addition, as I stated, they gave us additional $75 per pupil, so additional revenue. So the net effect was we didn't lose really any money on our foundation. We got a slight increase and we avoided the $650 proration back to our foundation allowance. Now, I can't really see hands, so if someone has a question, you got to speak up because I can't really see the hands on the right-hand side if someone pops up a hand. So as went through it, we already talked about the student cost. We talked about the reduction of the $650 that was avoided, $13.5 million. We had the new $75 per pupil. And also, when we went into this year, we knew they were going to get some money for the COVID grants of roughly about $8 million. Well, after it was all said and done, and as time progressed, we got $19.7 million in COVID funds. So there are different accounts. I won't get into the names too much, but what it basically did is it gave us additional money to deal with the pandemic as it applied to schools. Now, whenever the state gives us money, it's not usually free money. There's a lot of restrictions on how we can spend it. So as some of you brought up, mental health was one of the things you can spend it on. If you were going to lay off teachers, they remember that everybody wanted everybody to keep employment of everybody. So any laid off teachers, we can continue to pay and lower our class sizes. Virtual learning was another primary one that we were able to spend money on virtual learning, including software, textbooks, staffing, all that was available. And so all that kind of rolled into the budget for the 19.7 helped us offset any kind of loss also. So this looks at the expenditure side. As you can see, even though we had a $13 million gain on our revenue side, we only had an $8 million increase as we retained staff and we're spending additional money. So the thing is that as a budget director that I focused on spending the hardest money to spend first. So that way, if you have grant money that's very restricted and you have purposes for that money, you spend that first. And so we have moved some of our mental health, like social workers, psychologists, even our counselors. Part of our counselors are dealing with this kind of aspect. We were able to move those costs over to the CARES funds and basically free up the general fund costs because that is more usable for any purpose and not necessarily restricted for what the state said we can spend COVID on. So you can see we're generating a surplus in the general fund for 1 year because that COVID money will get spent in a year. And that way that money in the general fund can be used for other purposes or banked for a while. And we'll kind of go through that further discussion a little bit. But the idea was to use the most restricted money first, which was the COVID money. So what we did is we obviously, staffing is a big cost of our costs. It's usually 85% of our budget. We were able to recall or not lay off any of those surplus teachers. So we retained 16 positions we normally would have reduced because based on our actual staffing model of our class sizes, we actually retained those 16 positions. We increased staffing due to virtual and support positions. So we hired additional social workers. We hired additional teachers to help with the virtual side. And so those positions are in the budget or with CARES, the restricted grant funds. And the student sizes are lower because of the additional staff and our actual decrease in our student population. Our class sizes have been lowered, which will help with this online learning with the lower class size for teachers. And we've also started to look forward to next year for we always expect retirements, but we don't usually hire early because we don't know where those retirements are going to fall. But with the excess money we have, we are hiring additional K-12 teachers and hiring of social workers. In addition, we have also started to look at some counselors for the 3 high schools because additional 504 needs. We've started talking about hiring media specialists. And obviously, as Ms. Shannon talked earlier, a much robust summer school program. So all those are starting to roll into the budget with this extra money. Again, as I stated earlier, we always want to maximize the CARES grants because those are the most restricted. So that will generate a purpose for us for 1 year. So some of the things we're doing with the one-time surplus, we're going to reserve some money for cost investment in the staff. Some of the things we have noticed this year is with the unemployment the way it is and the minimum wage being pushed up, that some of our support staffs are being hard to fill. So we are looking at certain ways to maybe raise their wages, looking at adding positions. So we're kind of reserving some money for that. If you saw today, one of the things we're looking at is our safety and emergency. That was a big issue for us in the bond that people really liked. So since the bond issue isn't happening right now, we want to start still investing in that because it's what the public wants to see with us spend our money. So that's why all the middle schools are now getting cameras because we have this one-time money, which is good to use for an investment purpose into our facilities. That's where we're using it for that. And also we're going to put some money into the building and site fund to continue this process as we go along. And we also always have capital replacement needs, vehicles, buses, custodial equipment, things like that make us more efficient and reduce our operation costs in repairs or maintenance of the vehicles. So that you'll see also coming forward in this budget as we go out throughout the year. So just looking at a few things, this is the summary of the general fund. Now remember, our general fund is made up of our operational budget, our enhancement fund, and our athletic fund. So as you can see, our athletics are kind of on and off throughout the year. So we don't really expect a lot of savings in there, but there might be a little bit of savings as we go through. Our enhancement fund, a lot of our enhancement fund was paying for special positions like social workers and counselors. We moved that into the COVID grant fund. So we're going to have available funds. So we're going to transfer it to the building and site fund. But we're still expecting to spend roughly about $2 million. So if you look at column or the arrow C, we're looking at our general fund surplus of this year, about 4.1 million. But we're going to spend down some of our enhancement fund because remember, the enhancement fund we collect 1 year and we spend it the next year. So we've been spending the money, but we have a little bit of extra surplus. So we're trying to catch up on that. So there will be a little more money coming out the year. But in the total column on that arrow C, you'll actually see that we're looking at a $2 million surplus overall for the general fund. Now that might come in early. They're all depending on how fast we move back to this hybrid model and we start warming up the buildings more. We start using more electricity. We start using more custodial supply. So that sort of thing, our transportation costs, buses are starting to run now. So assuming that kind of holds and we get to full operation in that sense, we'll get that $2 million will be pretty accurate. But if we kind of delay stuff, that money might be a little higher than the 2 million.
Mr. Wall, we need to hold on for a second. I need a motion to extend the meeting.
I'll
To
motion.
extend the meeting.
All right.
We'll have a few more minutes.
We got the motion by trustee McDonald, supported by trustee Mosick. Could I get a roll call vote, please?
Trustee Barry,
Yes.
trustee D'Ambrosio,
You're still muted.
Yes.
trustee McDonald,
Yes.
trustee Moses, yes, trustee Petlicoff,
Yes.
trustee Watts,
Yes.
President Thorpe.
Yes. All right, Mr. Wall, we bought you some time. Don't use it all.
All right. So just again on the arrow B, we're always focusing on instruction and support. The support is more than just what you think is support as custodial, transportation, food service, stuff like that. and also as our itinerant staff. The instructional is costs that are actually in the classroom. That's how the state defines instruction. So if someone who's in front of kids, that's instruction. So that's usually your classroom teachers. Support could be your guidance counselors, media specialists, your mental health staff, all that is in support. So we still try to focus most of our money in front of kids. So that's why the instruction you'll always see as the highest expense that we always do. On the special revenue funds, the CARES Act, again, that's 19 million, much higher than what we expected. One thing you have to be aware of, this was the first round. They are starting to talk about CARES 2 funds that might be coming, and that could be up to as high as $30+ million. And one of the nice things about that for round 2, they're starting to allow us to do some infrastructure also. So our air handling systems, which was originally in the bond to work with, because some of our buildings are old and we don't have air conditioning everywhere. So some of the things we might be able to use that money for is that, but that's a more planning session as we go forward. The other thing is our food service fund, the Arrow B, is blooming. You know, they're feeding more kids than they ever fed before. And so that was kind of unexpected because the state has really lowered the requirements of how we count kids, you know, what kind of food we're serving, all the restrictions on grains and I can't even go into all those things, but those things have been listed. We've been offered to be able to provide more different alternatives and feed more kids. And the states right now don't even require, if a student comes from Allen Park, a parent, we feed them too. It's open-ended. So we have been feeding a lot more kids than we ever have, over 100,000 meals a week. And I give kudos to that cafeteria staff and management because they're doing a great job of feeding those kids. And if you remember in board briefs, I did put in a survey they did last November about the meals they're serving to see if they could even improve it better. And the other thing, again, just focusing, you know, where column B is, again, instruction is our key. We spend 55% of our money in our budget on people in front of kids. That's our priority. That's where we want to spend most of our money, and that's where we always will see that being the highest number. And just Arrow A, just looking at the surplus, again, with the COVID funds, that is freeing up money in our special revenue and general funds, where we're actually going to be able to put some money in our fund balance and potentially offer more programs. As I said, you know, more programs for potential staff, hiring more staff. So where we were back in May, June is a 180 for where we are now for our First Amendment, which is good news. So when it's good news, we don't spend a lot of time talking about it. But again, the Finance Committee will go more into detail. So, but and again, I always like this picture because a budget is complex. There's a lot of things that go into it. So it could be intimidating seeing all these trees, you know, right above you and all that work, but there's always light. And that's how we kind of lead ourselves to where we need to be.
I like the picture because there was no snow involved in it.
Yes.
Any comments for Mr. Wall?
And if you don't have it, you can always email me later. I'm always willing to talk about the budget.
I do not see any hands up, except for Dr. Maleko.
Very quickly, one thing with the hiring of teachers, we are going to start hiring almost immediately, and not just because of planning. We're going to have a number. What we decided to do was this question came up. So if we have the pandemic and we have in person, it will help for this year too. So if people for some reason have to go into quarantine or a teacher is missing, we'll now have teachers that even if we don't have a direct position, we'll have them in reserve to support needed areas for this year. So that's one of the things we're doing with that as well, along with social workers and counselors. And just a reminder, maybe a kudos to Mr. Wall, that meritorious budget. He's a international star with the work he does there. So, and that's all I have to say.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Next item, please.
Next item is Board of Education Business, Acknowledgement of Correspondence.
Did anyone have any correspondence? All right, next item, please.
Board Member Committee and Organization Reports.
Trustee Barry.
Yes, thank you, President Thorpe. We had a policy committee meeting just before our regular meeting. There was only really one item that we looked at, and that's one of our teachers from the CTE program. He's the lead teacher, John Barrel, recommended that we get into compliance by making some adjustments to our policy, which was recommended, and I'm sure it'll be reported to the full board, some of the changes. That, like I said, that was just so we're in compliance with federal law. There was a couple other things that Mr. Mustin gave us an education on, gave us a quick review of the current board procedure on adopting a policy, how to access board policy, the difference between a policy and a guideline, which I found very informative. We're also going to be looking at, was recommended from a couple of my colleagues that we're going to look at the cost of facility rentals. We're going to visit that policy. And the other policy that we're going to be visiting is staff social media policy. I think it's a good time to revisit that one and set some what is appropriate, what is not appropriate, with our eye on freedom of speech. That's all I have to report. Are there any questions? If I missed something, my colleagues, please chime in.
Good.
Thank you.
Trustee Barry, I would ask the policy committee, as you're rolling through policies, we had talked before about procedures for the district. If you find some procedures that we need to set up to support our policies and bylaws, please let us know.
I'm sorry, that was also mentioned, Vice President Thorpe. So yeah, thank you for the reminder.
Thanks.
Appreciate you.
Thanks. Any other committee meetings yet? So I'm going to mention, and this is an uncommon one, the Finance Committee is meeting tomorrow. Normally, most of our subcommittees meet right before a board meeting. These are different times. And while people can wait 30 days to find out what happened in the Finance Committee meeting, they could also view it online, just like any of our other board members through board meetings through our Facebook page. But we will still expect a report back from the Finance Committee at the next month if someone can remember that one. Trustee McDonald, Trustee Watts, I know you're both on that committee. Thanks. Next item, please.
Board members, superintendent commentary.
We have said a lot in this meeting, additional things that need to be said. Trustee Barry?
I'll be quick, President Thorpe. I'm looking forward to in-person meetings. I know it was mentioned earlier, yes, if we're expecting our students and our staff to get into in-person learning, we will follow suit too. Teachers, it was mentioned earlier, and we've heard it before, that teachers shouldn't be put in a position where they need to make a decision if it's follow their career or their family's health or their own personal health. You do not have to make that decision. Teachers, you have a lot of options. A lot of them were mentioned earlier. Obviously, COVID-19, federal FMLA, in the contracts, there are many options for teachers. So no, you shouldn't have, no teacher. I know this is real. You should not come into the building with anxiety levels so high that it's going to stress you out. We do not want you stressed out in front of we don't want you stressed out, period. But you do have options. Please take advantage of them. There's no doubt in my mind that Dr. Maleko's administration is willing to work with you. I did get a text regarding VLP, and I'm going to make a quick comment and see if Dr. Maleko wants to follow up. Our VLP program school is closed, but if you truly, as a parent, if you truly believe that maybe you didn't think that we're going to get to this point where we're going to have the blended learning instruction, and you didn't make the decision to put your student into the VLP, reach out to your administrator. If there is room, again, I don't believe we're going to be opening any more classrooms or moving any teachers around, and Dr. Maleko will comment on that as soon as I'm finished. But if there is room, I would believe that the administration and the school would make accommodations. That's all I have. Dr. Maleko, if you want to follow up on that.
Sure. Yeah, appreciate that. Right now we have a waiting list, so we are working on that, and we will, as you said, try to accommodate because it's a major shift to staffing. And when you deal with staffing, it just depends on whether you have spots in because we've also had those earlier that when we told them that, if, for example, elementary, that we were going to move them to the VLP and they signed up and then they didn't want to go in, those kind of things. And again, we try to accommodate them, but we can't guarantee it. And just a reminder, we did have 2 large windows where we were putting it out there,
Exactly.
giving people many opportunities to make that choice. So again, I agree with what you're saying. I support it. And that's where we're at with staffing, trying to accommodate. And we would do that in a normal situation when students, move or try to enroll in different schools, maybe within the district. We do our best, but it is not guaranteed.
Thank you, sir.
Sure. Thank you.
Trustee Moser, do you have an item?
Yeah, I want to mention something that was already brought up by Dr. Miliko, which is Black History Month. And it's an excellent time to explore the Black experience, including the history of and culture of African American people and the injustice faced by them, and how that injustice has been continuous to be confronted. I say it's important not to isolate Black history and culture into only one month. I was reviewing my son's homework this month, and I'm really glad that our district incorporates a lot of curriculum tied to exploring the African American history and culture. Next month is also March Reading Month, so I'm very excited to join some schools virtually to read to students, and I encourage my colleagues to do the same. Thank you.
Trustee McDonald?
Just a quick shout out. Congratulations to our new graduates.
Thank you.
Yeah, congrats. January graduates. Yeah.
January graduates.
Any other commentary? I will expand on a slightly different spin from what Trustee Barry said. And I had said this several months ago. When it comes to COVID, everyone is going to have to determine what do they think is safe in their own timeline. COVID is not going to go away. I don't see it ever going away. My belief is it'll become similar to the flu. It'll be there. There'll probably be vaccinations from year to year. And maybe in several years, catching COVID is not going to be thought of much different than catching a flu. I don't know, but I just don't see this thing going away. And at some point, sooner or later, you're going to have to get comfortable getting back out there, so to speak. Whether it's going back to a grocery store or a restaurant, being in a close proximity to other people. But you won't ever get comfortable if you don't start occasionally expanding your boundaries. So start taking little steps, start getting back out there. None of us want to be locked away forever. So as you become more comfortable, please get out there and start to re-engage as you become more confident. All right, Trustee Watts.
Mask. Make sure that when we are going out, though, that we are wearing a mask and that we are following safety protocols. Because again, I mean, everyone has that comfort level, but we have to remember that this is something that we've never experienced. And if we're going to do it, we have to do it with the highest level of safety. So to follow up with what you were saying, Trustee Thorpe.
All right, next item, please. Oh, so I'm sorry, Dr. Miliko.
Yeah, I just got word, and I don't know, Joanne, is Mr. Sortes here in the waiting room?
Yes, let me bring him in.
Okay, so he was approved tonight by the board as it's on the regular HR, it's not on the superintendent, but he is the new transportation supervisor. Just wanted to congratulate him, and he's been in our district for many years, and I can see him there. I think he was trying to get in, so just wanted to maybe give him a congratulations if we could, and welcome.
He doesn't know, probably.
I don't know if we can hear him, but okay.
Rick, can you hear us? You just
You're muted.
Congratulate you, Rick.
You're trying to talk, you're muted, Rick.
What about now?
Yes.
Hey, there you go. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Dr. Miliko, President Thorpe, I just want to thank you guys for the opportunity to be the transportation supervisor. Looking forward for the rest of the school year. Exciting. I know our drivers, our bus attendants are ready to take their students back, get them into school as safely as possible.
Thank you very much. All right,
Make a
can I get a
motion to
motion to extend the meeting?
So
Like to make a
moved.
motion, support.
Roll call, please.
Trustee Barry,
Yes.
trustee D'Ambrosio,
Yes.
trustee McDonald,
Yes.
trustee Moses, yes, trustee Petlicoff,
Yes.
trustee Watts,
Yes.
President Thorpe.
Yes. Next item, please.
Request for information or future agenda items.
Trustee Petlicoff.
Yeah. We had conversation at our retreat about, and you brought it up about, developing guidelines for board bylaws, and kind of fleshing things out. And when I was, board president a couple of years ago, we had this conversation then because it cropped, up as an issue. And actually, trustee Barry was the one who started the conversation about our policy 166 on the agenda about board members asking requests for information items. And at that time, the conversation began in August. We had another conversation in September where trustee Lane suggested an ad hoc committee. And in October, I filled that ad hoc committee, but it never, because it was only a couple months, it never really was put into play. But the philosophy was that board members traditionally ask for information and have questions and requests for information during this time period. And the reasoning behind that, and I've been on the board for a long enough time to understand it, was so that we could gauge whether it was a topic that other board members also had an interest in. We're looking for similar information. It would spark the conversation if it was something that was relatable to other board members, or at the time, the other board members would say, oh, we have no interest in that. The only way a board has any authority is as a board of 7 making decisions at a full board meeting with a vote. Asking for information that just satisfies someone's individual curiosity and taking time for administrators to gather that information for reports and whatnot could be cutting into their work schedule. So the reason why board members should spend most of their time asking questions during a public board meeting is so that we can flesh it out, make sure it's something of interest for the full board that is going to be coming before the board for a decision, and that information and data is required. Or the board with an ad hoc committee, the philosophy would say, nobody else has any interest in it. Why are we taking up time of our administrators gathering this kind of report and putting it together? Now, on occasion, every board member is going to have an individual question that might not be time consuming. But I would like to have the conversation again. Do we need to revisit, because we have a policy about how board members ask for information, and do we need to have the ad hoc committee look for ways that request so that our administration isn't put under undue strain to fulfill some path of information that the board is never going to use for any reason. So I would just like to suggest, along with other policy guidelines that we may investigate in the coming year, that we include that as a conversation for future agenda items.
Trustee Barry.
I understand what trustee Petrikov is saying, but we just passed a resolution. We talked about a resolution about transparency. And if we start creating, a committee to talk about maybe what I'm thinking, I'll just use myself as an example. That's kind of like limiting, my thoughts or somebody else's thoughts. I can go back to 11 years ago when I asked a simple question: what is our graduation rates, broken down by middle schools? I just mentioned one high school, and I know, if I remember right, Trustee Petrikov was there and Trustee McDonald was there. And my colleagues started questioning, why am I questioning the administration of a certain high school? And at that point, it created a little discussion among my colleagues and I explained why I was asking that. And what we came up with after that question was, we can do better. I remember at one school, graduation rate was at 77%. Another school was like at 81%, and one is 88%. I'm not going to give you the history where we're at now, but maybe when somebody at an open board meeting asks for information, maybe another colleague might not be thinking about that subject. So if we start, let me finish. I gave you a chance to finish. If we start talking about that behind closed doors, and let's say another trustee brings up something and it doesn't go anywhere, another person, it's like, what are we doing? We're trying to limit to, or maybe
That's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm.
That's not what you're saying. I understand what you're saying. I like things to happen in an open meeting. That's all. That's all.
Right.
If I'm thinking about, I need information to make a better decision, or maybe I ask information, and once we get the information, Trustee A and Trustee B and C can have a conversation, and that's how we grow. So
and that's
my
exactly
thoughts.
That's exactly what I'm saying, Trustee Barry, because you were the one who was fully on board with this suggestion 2 years ago, and we're part of the ad hoc committee. But the thinking behind it is that a lot of these questions should happen during this time period at an open meeting, so that other board members know what other board members are interested in or thinking, and can either sign on and say, yes, that's something that we should continue to pursue or not, and not have questions being asked individually all the time behind the scenes, that may be cumbersome for administration to have to answer if it's not going to go anywhere for all I'm suggesting is, as part of the policy guidelines, should be to incorporate a code of conduct or a type of response. We already have it in our policy that
it is in our policy already, and you keep saying that I was on board for the ad hoc committee. My thinking was, if there was going to be ad hoc committee, I wanted to be in it. I wanted to volunteer to see what direction it was going. But I don't think there was ever a point where, like, if anybody, I'll just keep referring to myself. I've never asked a question where I said, and by the way, here's the deadline. Dr. Maleko or his director would come back and say, maybe it was a simple question and we get the answer in board notes next Thursday.
Yeah.
Or maybe it was something that needed some time, maybe a month or two to get through the gathered information report. So
this was to look at when there's a lot of detail that would go into fulfilling the question request. And so should we as a board be saying, yes, we want that information, it could be useful to us? Or is this just one person who has an interest and the rest of the board would weigh in at that time? All I'm suggesting is that every board member tries to remember to be mindful of those kinds of requests, and that for all of us to be able to share in those kinds of opportunities to be part of the conversation about questions being asked.
I would remind
that should happen at the board meetings.
I would remind the board how we receive reports from Dr. Maleko and his team. They will usually put together something that shows us in the strategic plan what they are referring to. Maybe we could consider doing something similar. And I think that gets to what Trustee Petrikov and Trustee Barry are saying is what's the reason behind the ask? And how does it relate back to what we're doing so that it can be beneficial to the district.
I'm okay with that. Just going back to when originally the discussion started, I know of at least one colleague that felt that it was, intimidated. Maybe shouldn't.
And that's
he or
not what
she
I'm
shouldn't-
trying.
I'm not accusing, I'm not saying that's what you were thinking, but once you started going that direction, and I won't point at anybody else and say, if I feel like, okay, let me just take care of what I got to take care of. I'm not even going to bother. No, we should be able to ask those questions anytime we want. I'm not saying
also
that,
something that we are fine with the Open Meetings Act, that we have these discussions in a one-on-one situation.
Absolutely.
And as we have small group meetings with 3 or less of us with Dr. Maleko, we can also bring these things up and try to build a consensus to see if this is an individual item that the board would support additional information on.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, and that's all I'm asking
right.
is that we just.
Trustee Mosick, did you have an item?
Yeah, I actually have a request for information, and I hope this is not going to take much time to get. This is regarding how much money as a district do we spend on testing, and that includes all types of testing from MSTEP to WIDA to NWEA, iReady, and other programs. So if we can get some dollar amounts and the contracts that we currently pay for those test programs, that includes any personnel or material costs that we have, as well as transportation if there are any. So the reason why I'm asking for this is I've been reading a lot on how much testing our students go through and how much districts really pay for these things. And I'd like to see if we're really doing the right thing as far as spending money on those tests.
So what you're saying then also, Trustee, is you want to include the voluntary testing we're doing along with the required testing.
Correct, yes.
And
That's what I want.
you're really talking more about, I'm going to say standardized testing, right? Not just the regular.
No, standardized exams only, yeah.
Could we
not
also
exams.
expand it and say that, could we maybe get numbers for like the last 2 or 3 years to see if there's been any real change with those numbers over the last couple of years? Would that be all right?
I think that's fair, yeah.
Dr. Maleko, are you good with what we're looking for there?
Sure, and just comment, MSTEP is paid for by the state, so that'll be in the report. And then we've also received some competitive grants from the state that have funded some of the assessment as well. So we'll put that into the report. But
So
I'm clear on that.
will it be categorized then as state mandated, federally mandated, in our own, you'll have it all in categories as well as how it's being funded?
Sure, we've got a great director of assessment that will work with Mr. Wall. I'm Dr. Patterson, and I know we'll have a good report as he always provides. So we can definitely do that.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I would just bring up again, Dr. Maleko, as we've discussed some of the goals the board has for this year, if you start to talk to your team and come up with some specific ideas that you've got that can address those areas. All right, next item, please.
Next item is future meeting dates. Monday, February 15, 2021, HFC meeting, 7 p.m. via video conference. Details to be determined. Check online at hfcc.edu/board-meeting-schedule. Monday, March 8th, 2021, P12 Board of Education meeting, 7 p.m. via video conference and virtually available live for viewing via YouTube on our YouTube channel, as well as our Facebook page and cable channel, Comcast Dearborn Channel 19 and WOW Channel 15. And hopefully we will be in person for that March meeting.
We will make sure the public knows if we're able to go to at least a hybrid format for that meeting. There's no other business before the board. We are adjourned. Have a good night,
Have a
everyone.
good night.
Good night.